as to verse 6 of Isaiah 24, since we're in that chapter. The few men left, God was bringing a destruction upon the earth, and there's only going to be a few people who survive, a remnant. And last week we discussed that more in detail.
Was that apply contextually only to Israel and Judah, or to all nations everywhere?
Well, in verses 1 through 6, it's dealing with, verse 1, the entire world. So, and that's why you see in verse 6, idea of world, and then the earth or the land in verse 3. So it's not specifying a specific nation. Now then, in verses 7 through verse 15, we have the world's pleasures judged. And he says in verse 7 that the new wine mourneth, the vine languisheth, all the merry-hearted do sigh. So now then, with what we see preceding in verses 1 through 6, the earth itself now is mourning. The land declines to produce what it used to produce. We probably remember droughts that have taken place in this nation. The land quit producing what it normally produced. And of course, prices skyrocketed when that took place, but that's another matter. But the land stopped producing. That's what you have here. The joyousness of the new wine, it says, mourns. The reason being, there's none to drink it. The few that are left. That's the latter part of verse 6 there. So there's very few people left. None to drink the wine, the new wine. The vine languisheth from the standpoint, while it may produce, there's no one to cultivate it, no one to pick the grapes from it. And so they're just left there to decay and rot. And so all the merry-hearted do sigh, even the most merry-hearted people. All they do, sigh. That's the condition because of the dismal circumstances that they're now finding themselves in. Dale?
It predicted in Jeremiah 25, 9-14, and a lot of things that Isaiah says happened in Jeremiah. So Babylon got destroyed so bad that you couldn't even find it no more. It was buried in the sand of the desert. So there wasn't no Babylonians much around, but developed with wine plants or vines and stuff. So it would be literally fulfilled in their instance.
Well, this is dealing with the world, though, and not just one nation. And as far as when the fulfillment of this is, we don't really know. We don't have a time frame as to the fulfillment. We just have the prophecy of it. In verse 8 then, the myrrh of tablets ceaseth, the noise of them that rejoice endeth, the joy of the harp ceaseth. When you're talking about the tablets, the noise, the joy of the harp, or the harp, These are basically instruments of rejoicing that would be used during time of merriment and rejoicing. And the idea thus is presented to us that this time of rejoicing is no longer. It's not there anymore. All of that merriment, the joyousness, it's ended. It's ceased. This is a great deal like Isaiah 5 and verse 12, where he talks about, and the harp and the viol and the tablet and the pipe and wine are their feast, or in their feast, but they regard not the work of the Lord, neither consider the operation of his hands. So all of these things end because they're not being obedient to God. And we discussed that 20 years ago when we were in chapter 5. But the festival songs that they would sing of drinking during the vintage season, they have been discontinued. Only thing left, desolation and sorrow. It is a sad situation when all you have left is sorrow. There's no hope, there's no joyousness, there's nothing to laugh about. Everything is sorrow and heartache. You get, as our term sometimes that we use, beat down so quickly and completely that all you have left is despondency and despair. And that's pretty much what is being presented to us in these verses. That all of these pleasures, all of these things that would bring pleasure, they're being destroyed. They're no longer. So, well, I'll get it down right sometime. So all they have is despondency and despair, sadness, sorrow, desolation. And merriment, joy, that's the case when the crops would come in. That's the time of joy. I mean, your crops are there, everything is coming together, everyone comes out and joins together. It's total joy. And now then it's expressing it's time for the crops to come in, but there's nobody there. And they just die on the vine. And so instead of that joyous celebration that you would have, nothing but despair. In verse 9, they shall not drink wine with the song. Strong drink shall be bitter to them that drink it. While they seek to drown their cares with wine and strong drink, instead of it drowning their cares, it's going to taste bitter to them. No pleasure in it. It doesn't even taste good because everything's been destroyed. I'll come back to, in a minute or two, the idea of wine because we see it talked about a great deal in these verses. But remember this verse in relationship to that. We'll talk about it more when we get to verse 11, actually. In verse 10, you have the city of confusion is broken down. Every house is shut up, that no man may come in. So while Isaiah has been dealing with the land, now then he turns to the cities. Maybe the cities are better off. No, they're not. Have the same problems there. The word confusion here that's in the King James, American Standard has waste, the city of waste. I know I checked it one time what the New King James was. I think it's confusion also, isn't it? So, I say American Standard has waste. The word means desolation, and thus waste. Confusion. Ghost town presents in our minds something a little bit different, that it just left and no one's there. Here you have people there, they're just not getting out in the streets, and they've allowed everything to become like a ghost town, even though they are there. All that they are doing basically is getting into their house, locking the doors, putting the bar down over it, like people are doing today, especially in some areas where there have been the riots and such. What do? You get in your house and you bar the doors and hope for the best. Yeah, the Macy's parade Thanksgiving Day. Nobody on the streets. That's what it would be like, and what he's describing. No one's getting out. So, well, no one is. Common sense doesn't make any difference. No one's getting out. Now then, going back to the city of confusion or the city of waste, what city is it? Desolation, okay. New King James, desolation.
Since it started out saying it was like worldwide, that would be the city of wherever it is. Not talking about Jerusalem and other Judean cities mainly and only, right?
Okay, there are some who think that it's dealing with Jerusalem. I don't. I think it's dealing that there's no specific city that is intended by the statement. And thus he's making a generic statement that here's, we might say the large cities. Well, which one? Well, just all of them. It's a general statement. And that's kind of what I think he's dealing with here. It's a general statement of here's these towns, and no one's getting out. The city has been left to desolation. All that the people are doing is boarding up their houses and staying in the house. Compare the compare New Year's Day several years ago and this year, and no one was there.
Why would nobody get out unless there's a reason not to get out? There must be danger outside in a few spots
Dis, that's it. There's no use.
They're depressed and they feel like this.
Well, certainly they're depressed. Everything's destroyed. There's no joy. All there is despair, despondency. That's the way people feel. So what do? As people do many times, anyone who's despondent, they shut themselves in and shut everyone else out. That's what they're doing. Henry, and then I'll get to you, Pam. Yeah. Unless you made the Romans mad, they really didn't destroy the cities. Nebuchadnezzar, as they would go in, they would destroy the cities. Alexander the Great would. The Medo-Persians did to a certain extent, but not to the extent that the Babylonians did. It doesn't state what is causing this desolation other than it is an instrument of God. Right. And this, from verse 1 on, it's dealing with the land generally, and not any specific nation. So that presents some of the difficulties of the fulfillment of it. The prophecy itself is easy enough to understand, but when did it happen? And my best answer, I don't know. That's real helpful, isn't it? Kind of what you figured. I don't think anyone else knows either. So you don't have a time element as to when it would be fulfilled, nor do you have a cause element other than God is bringing this destruction. Pam? Already answered it, okay. Carl?
Well, when it says that the food is, the crops weren't going to be there, what's the biggest commodity back then would be food. So when people don't have money from their crops, they're not buying nothing, they're saving nothing, and so it would affect everything.
To a certain extent, the crops were there. There wasn't anyone to harvest it. That was the problem. And yes, the result is the same, though, as to what you're saying. Whether there's no crops or whether the crops produce and no one's there to harvest it, same result as far as what takes place. Now, did I see another hand? I thought I did. Maybe not. That's a good, yeah, that was, of course, way before this, but you have the same thing, yes. Happened in Egypt, happened in the Palestinian area, was basically everywhere. Agabus, if you remember in Acts, prophesied of a famine that would be basically worldwide. So there are other occasions where there are famines likened to this, but again, there's nothing in this context as to indicate when this is going to take place or the source that God is using to bring it about. So verse 11. There is a crying for wine in the streets. All joy is darkened. The mirth of the land is gone.
That's kind of confusing because it says two verses before, strong drink is bitter. So now they ceased, it's done, their attitude has changed. Now they're so depressed that now they don't think it's bitter anymore. They're too depressed to worry about it. Contextually.
The wine was still being produced, even in verse 9. But it's scarce and it's sought after. The purpose of it here is to drown their sorrows. The point, though, is that nothing can drown their sorrows. The wine is not effective. Now then, let's talk about wine for a minute. There are various words that are translated wine in the Bible, both from the Hebrew and also the Greek. Here in verse 11, the Hebrew word is yayin. It would be Y-A-Y-I-N if you were spelling it. Yayin. It is a general word that deals with simply the juice of the grape. In verse 9, when it talks about that they shall not drink wine with a strong drink, shall be bitter to them, when it has that type of a parallel in verse 9, it's dealing with wine that would be alcoholic wine. However, there is wine that is simply the juice of the grape, and that could be in any form of the juice of the grape. In fact, Isaiah uses it for the juice that is still inside the grape, as well as using it for alcoholic drink and non-alcoholic. A lot of times I hear people ignorantly argue that there was no way in which to prevent the grape juice at that day and time from turning alcoholic, and that it would do so almost immediately. That's simply false. They had multiple ways of preventing grape juice from becoming alcoholic. And I think it's Zondervan's Pictorial Dictionary list, I believe it's 14 different ways that they had of preventing grape juice from turning alcoholic. So that's one of the arguments that we oftentimes face in dealing with drinking wine. A lot of people just say, well, it's wine, get over it, that's alcohol. And thus, anytime they see the word wine, they see alcohol. Well, that's false as well. Now then, is wine ever approved? The drinking of alcoholic wine ever approved?
In Timothy's case, but he didn't say it specify that it was alcohol. I guess you'd have to look at the Greek word behind it.
Okay, in Timothy's case, and the word there is dealing with is a general word that deals with any type of juice of the grape. Is alcoholic wine, put it that way, ever approved by God. Well, that's going back to Timothy, 1 Timothy 5, in which Paul says to basically drink no longer water, but use a little wine for your stomach's sake and thine off infirmities. Okay, but that's not answering my question specifically. We'll get to that aspect. Yes, it is. Now then, that may surprise some, especially hearing that from me. But yes, if you are honest with the Scriptures, God does, in the Scriptures, approve of using alcoholic wine on occasions. What you then have to do is, what are those occasions? And let me go ahead and add very briefly, some individuals were forbidden totally from it. Kings, the Nazirite vow would be one, but also a priest. Now then, remember that one, those two in particular, because I'll come back to that idea. Okay, he was a Nazirite, took basically a Nazirite vow his entire life. Nazirites were not to drink it. But, again, God does approve it on occasion. When? Well, one has been mentioned already, Timothy, medicinally. How many have ever taken cough syrup? Anybody? And I ask a different way. Is there anyone who has not taken cough syrup in their life? Okay, look at the bottle of NyQuil and its ingredients. Usually the first ingredient, or one of the first ingredients, is alcohol. Cough syrup is very high in alcoholic content. That's the purpose of it. It is a good carrier for all of the other ingredients that will help. Thus, the use of alcohol in those type of products. Have you ever seen a mother give a little bit of cough syrup to a child to calm them down, to make them sleep, making them an alcoholic? Well, that's what they're doing, whether they realize it or not, because of the alcoholic content. It causes that child to become sleepy and depresses. By the way, alcohol is not a stimulant, it is a depressant. It depresses you. I know, hot toddies, those were very popular years ago. But God's statement to Timothy is not for drinking beverage, alcohol as a beverage. It is dealing with the taking of medication. And God approves it under such circumstances. Well, that's true. It's take a little. And if you don't understand that, didn't he say, drink no longer water? So is water forbidden to be, we can't drink any water any longer? No one can drink water. No, that's not what he's dealing with. He's saying, here's a medication for your ailments and for your stomach in particular, and you use that medication. The medication in this situation was alcohol, and it would be alcohol mixed with water generally. To the alcoholic content would then purify the water. So, in the case of medicine, it is approved by God. If you read Proverbs, you mentioned Proverbs, let me go to the other aspect. God approves the use of alcoholic beverages in relationship to sorrow and the drowning of sorrows, and at the point of death, that there is that proper use of it. Have you ever seen a doctor give a husband or a wife who has had their spouse die and give them certain medications for calming effects? And well, that's what God is saying in relationship to alcohol. It would have been just as proper for that doctor to prescribe, alcohol, an alcoholic beverage in that type of a situation. I'm not saying that that's what they should, because we have different medications today that are more effective. I'm just saying God is approving it in that way. Okay, Henry? Elders can't drink it. Oh, you wouldn't imagine all of the arguments that go along drinking arguments, those who want to say we can drink socially, and their use of the elders and deacons and those two statements. When I hear that argument, and I've never had anyone respond to this yet, maybe somebody will, or they have and I didn't realize it or didn't see it, but James condemns the overflowing of wickedness, the superfluity of wickedness. Thus, a little bit of wickedness is all right, isn't it? If not, why not? All James is condemning is the overflowing of it. So as long as it's in moderation, wickedness is all right. If that's the argument somebody wants to make, and I know you're not, Henry. But to deal with that argument that people do make for beverage alcohol. Mm-hmm. And stop the labor. That's what they did at the hospital. Things like that, God has approved those things. I know of a case where a doctor told someone every night, drink a glass of wine because you need to gain weight and you're not gaining any weight. I would have freely given him some of mine, but that was the purpose of it. It was a prescribed medication in that sense by a doctor to do that. So yes, the Bible does, and if we're going to be honest with the Bible, allow the use of alcoholic beverages in certain situations. Now then, the real question, though, that we face today is alcoholic beverage all right to drink as a beverage? Beverage alcohol, not medical alcohol, not end-of-life alcohol, not things like that, but as a beverage, is it all right? And in that situation, the answer is no. The Bible never approves that. Mm-hmm.
So they were going to make them just go to light beer. They was getting all upset.
Yeah.
So they had to drink twice as much now.
Had to drink twice as much to get the same buzz. You got to drink more in order to get that buzz that they wanted, and that's the reason that they drank. But let me just use one passage in this regard, and there's a lot of them that could be called upon. Maybe I'll preach a sermon about this one before too long. But Ephesians 5 and verse 18 in particular. And in saying this, I know this is a little bit of a technical argument, but I know it's a valid argument. It's not expressed in the English as much, but in Ephesians 5:18, be not drunk with wine, wherein is excess, but be filled with the Spirit. The word drunk there is the key word. There's the Greek word methuo, which deals with drinking, with Greek verbs. When you add it's at the end, it's a sigma kappa ending. If we were writing it in English or transliterating those letters, it would be SK. And so when those two letters are added to a verb at the end, it is what's called an inceptive verb. There are other terms that are used, but it's an inceptive verb. If you look at that word inceptive, it means the starting of a process. And that's what what takes place here in Ephesians 5:18. He doesn't use methuo, he uses methusko, which is an SK ending, which makes it an inceptive verb. W. Vine in Vine's dictionary basically states that it is, I don't even have his quote. I've got other people's quotes. But he calls it an inceptive verb. It is the beginning of a process. How do you begin the process of becoming drunk? With your first drink. Now then he says, do not, and literally it could be translated properly, start the process of being drunk with wine. Well, you won't get to verse 18 for a few weeks at least. So it is do not start the process of being drunk with wine. Now, when do you start the process? When you take the first drink. Thus, do not take the first drink of alcohol. That's what he's saying. Because that starts the process. Now, there's a lot of other arguments that could be used, and rightfully so, in dealing with that. But this is a clear statement and prohibition against it, with an understanding that we've already stated, God does allow it medicinally for end of life and for things such as that. But as far as drinking a beverage, do not take the first drink, because that starts the process.
Personal drinking on your own or for drinking socially, that would prohibit both of them.
Wouldn't matter. Do not start the process and you start the process by taking the first drink. So it doesn't matter whether it's individually by yourself or whether you're out with a big group of people. Not going to make any difference. You don't start the process, and you start the process when you take the first drink. So don't take the first drink. Yes. For the pain, to dull the pain, and he refused it. And that is the case. We'll start with verse 11 then and continue on in that and dealing with it. Realizing that really we just dealt with the aspect of the drinking part in this.